be. It says showtime and we are live. I've got a little red button in the top right corner. So we are into the LinkedIn abyss, streaming through our LinkedIn Live for this session around the contact center network and how Agentic AI is starting to rear its head in every single conversation that I'm having. But one of the things we're talking about in this session specifically is what does that mean to the future of the BPO market. So thank you very much for tuning in. If you've joined us, and if you are joining us, just so I know I'm not talking to myself, it would be wonderful if somebody could drop a comment into the comment section underneath the event. Just say hello, tell us where you're calling from, or where you're dialing in from, and that way I know that we're not talking to ourselves. But if we are, I've got two awesome people to talk to for the next 60 minutes. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they'll do a far better job than I will. But I've got Justin Aldrich and Jimmy Hosang. So I'm going to hand over to you, Justin, who looks like he's calling from the most glorious destination. But he's reliably told me that he's in maybe less of a glorious one, but still a nice one. So Justin, give us a little bit of an intro into yourself and tell us where you're dialing from.
Hey Gary, hey Jimmy. Yeah, hi everybody. Probably some people who've dialed in will know me. I've been in the BPO industry in all of its guises, and we'll probably touch on a few of those over the last sort of 20 plus years. The reason the background is there, I work for a company called Coreforce Outsourced Specialists, and we run operations out of Cape Town, where I was last week. I am in a glorious location. I'm in glorious Yorkshire, but I thought this background was better than the wall of my office. Yeah, so I've seen a huge amount of change in the BPO industry, some that's been forced upon us and some that we've sort of taken and run forward with. Change is kind of been at the heart of what we've always done. Sometimes as an industry we may not have been as fast as we should have been, but yeah, going to be an interesting conversation. I'm sure Jimmy and I will come at it from slightly different ways, but there's good experience in the room and healthy debate. And ultimately, what I'm seeing is more and more, yes, people are still a critical, key, brilliant piece of resource and expertise, but how do we best use that technology, not only to make it better for the customer and faster and easier, but also to make the people in the BPO industry's life better, easier, and allow them to do perhaps other more exciting things than some of them are doing today. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And Jimmy, over to yourself.
So, hi everybody, Jimmy Hosang, and I'm the founder and CEO of Mojo CX. I am a little bit poacher turned gamekeeper. I did spend some of my formative years working in BPO, and so I know kind of the trials and travails of the industry. And my kind of position, looking at it from a Mojo point of view and just generally, is I was on this same kind of live event 4 or 5 years ago when I said CRM is dead, and as you can see, that's what's happened over the last few years. Salesforce's earnings yesterday didn't hit the market particularly well. Salesforce is down. Salesforce is the bellwether of everything. I have said things before about CCAS being dead and things like
Nostradamus that. Of the contact center.
Yeah, they call me the hunchback of Nostradamus. And I think it's this, and I think it's the same way with BPO, and I think that's been meted out, that's been played out within the space. I think unless the BPO, big BPOs and big and small BPOs like adapt and adjust to like the new paradigm, I think they'll end up being like the blockbusters to the Netflix that's coming up. And But I feel like so many within the industries are just not ready to make that painful change in their pricing models, to take that instant hit of the revenue for long-term gains. And that'll be interesting. That's what I'm interested in the debate today, like finding out Justin's thoughts on the matter.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into some of the questions that we've got for today, because we've got about 60 minutes to tackle this, and I'm really keen to kind of understand. Particularly your perspective, Justin, as somebody who's in the BPO industry, and kind of adapting to some of that shift. But before we do that, I kind of want to just open up the I suppose, the landscape and just define what it is that we're referring to here. So when we talk about agentic AI, what do you think that actually means in a BPO context, and how is it fundamentally different from some of the automation that we might have seen before that BPOs have been leaning in towards?
Well, from my perspective, and there's probably different definitions. Agentic AI is, rather than something doing just a specific task and being programmed to do that task, taking that task further, following through to a call resolution, managing a next action, and also, and we've always talked about this when we've talked about AI, but learning and evolving as that goes on. Jimmy, you've probably got a more developed definition of agentic AI, but certainly, when we're having conversations at Callforce, when I'm having conversations with prospects, there's so many terms, and I'm going to use a new one in a minute when we come on to some of the questions. But there are so many terms. Ultimately, we need to, as sales individuals, certainly for me, we need to be a little bit more consultative and really take it back to what is the customer trying to achieve. The technology is out there. Also the people are out there, and lots of different functions are out there. How do we blend them all together, and what does that actually mean when they are? But yeah, agentic AI, allows next actions to be taken, and intelligent, active, in call or in interaction actions to be taken, rather than something that you program and let run. More thinking on its feet, and being able to think outside the box and being empowered to help something through to a first call resolution.
And Jimmy, what's your thoughts about that? When we talk about agentic AI in the contact center industry, I suppose we think about that whole journey orchestration piece, but what does it mean, and what do you think the relevance of it and the importance of it is in a BPO context?
I think it's to do with the historic model. Look, it's called outsourcing. The historic model of an outsourcer is you've got a contact center of 100 people, 200 people, 1,000 people, internal resource. You've got buildings associated with it. You've got the IT management. You've got all the staffing issues around it, and it's moving that to be somebody else's problem, somebody else's dime, and then being able to manage that. And I think if you then sort of start to manage that through, you can see the progression, which was, it was onshore outsourcing. You then go, well, how can I reduce my costs? How can I do it so then I can offshore? So, over the last 15, 20 years, we've gone to like different places like South Africa, Philippines and stuff. I think then it's like, well, now you've like squeezed that out of it. How do I make even more improvements? So all of your back office overheads and things. So you've got like, well, all of your QA, right, well, I need to automate it. So not necessarily being agentic AI, but the agentic AI journey probably started with maybe chatbots, which weren't AI. It was just if this, then that. And then speech analytics. The speech analytics of 15 years ago, which got every like second vowel incorrect, and you couldn't really piece anything together, and they charge you millions of pounds for the benefit of doing it. And then over time, I think it's been quite slow to adopt. I think the chatbots in general, like I've never been a fan of chatbots. I think it takes longer to get stuff done, and it's sometimes a more frustrating experience. And for someone who was like a speech analytics specialist, I thought the speech industry was just terrible at delivering ROIs, and I think that was pretty well understood. Like there's a lot of people probably who are listening now who've been burnt by historic speech things. But I think first of all with RPA, and the first spring of RPA with the kind of a Blue Prism and UiPath, we started to see like some benefits and stuff. So we started to see some benefits and things. And then after that, we have then started to see like a path through, and then with the advent of LLMs, we have started to move more towards the combination between an AI understanding something and an AI understanding something, and then being able to do the task like completely for us. And I think that's kind of brings us to today, where you've got this, everybody's trying to squeeze the cost out of it. You've got big big tech, big outsourcers who built revenue on this outsourcing model. But then you've got this boom of, it's not SaaS, it's AI with an ever decreasing cost to serve on that. How do both of those things fit within a paradigm? That's what I think's now where we are in the challenge.
That's a really interesting paradigm shift there, I think, that's needed in the BPO industry to do it. And it makes me question, I suppose, whether or not is that type of mindset and that shift in how we're operating as internal contact centers and some of the stuff we might have looked to outsourcers to do becoming more of I suppose surplus to requirements. So Justin, from your perspective, do you see the use of AI in contact centers and the proliferation of that in more internal contact centers a threat or an opportunity to transform as a BPO sector?
I certainly don't see it as a threat. I think running an internal contact center, certainly in the UK, is incredibly difficult just from a cost perspective. Now some organizations are going to go on that AI journey, and that's fantastic. Outsourcing is not necessarily, you shut what you're doing down in the UK and you put it out into South Africa or the Philippines. It can be teams running next to each other. You could outsource because growth is difficult from a cost perspective. So let an offshore provider manage that growth while you manage the core team. So I don't see it as a threat. I see, and I totally agree with Jimmy on the journey that we've all been on. And not to point the finger, but I think tier ones have been quite slow to adopt because they then have that internal discussion of how are we going to manage losing 10, 15, 20 plus thousand seats of work that we do because technology is going to take over. And I think a lot of organizations have struggled because AI in all its forms was potentially being pitched as a big bang. You switch it on and it's going to do everything. I think those are the successful, and then again, some of the large tier one players are probably a little slower in this, and organizations the size of the organization I work for are probably a little bit quicker, is partnering with or joint venturing with really good native AI players who can demonstrate a particular use case that can be implemented and solve a problem. It's not buy our AI tool and solve all of your problems. It's like which is the problem we need to solve. We solve that, and then we solve the next one, and then we solve the next one. But in my view, some of the larger players are still playing the big bang AI approach discussion, whereas organizations where I think organizations can really get the benefit is specific use cases that solve a specific problem. Very easy then to go back to the board and say, thank you for that investment. We spent it on some AI. This is the problem we solved, and here is the return on investment. Where do we go next? Now, some organizations are going to lose a lot of people because of the drive to technology, in this case, AI. But if we look at that in a slightly different way, we're removing some of the maybe perhaps mundane tasks that some of those individuals have to plow their way through. We're enabling some of the really skilled people and the great people who either, in an internal call center perspective, love and own and embrace the IP of your brand and your product. And we try and replicate that in the outsource world. But they can do more valuable interactions. They can do, they can deal with more. They can put more focus on dealing with vulnerable customers, or upselling, cross-selling, and gaining wallet share, etc. So. I think it's important. Like, I don't think one is without the other. And so, your question was about threat. I don't see it as a threat. If we do it properly, absolutely. If BPOs, and I know Jimmy will say, if BPOs do not adopt AI and start having it as part of their offering and start making it work, then some BPOs will disappear. And I think that's absolutely right. Those that embrace it, go into the right joint ventures, try it internally, trial it with existing customers, and actually understand the results, and then put it right up front. When the days of your mess for less are kind of gone. It's like, if we take on what you're doing right now, how do we make it better? How do we do it quicker, faster, smoother, more efficiently, report better at it, and by the way, implement technology. You know, that's where I think outsourcing, the good outsourcers are now. There are some that will still your best for less, please.
I think you're on the money there, Justin. I think historically, the BPO sector has been good for that. It's saying, right, we've got some fancy tools and some fancy tech. We've got more omni-channel capabilities. We've got better knowledge management. We've got more flexible resources. We've got all the workforce management. We've got all of the stuff that we can help you operationalize quicker and take on your, I love that phrase, your mess for less, with ease. What I think the shift is now, and Jimmy, I'm interested in your take now, is that it's becoming increasingly easier for contact centers to automate, to introduce AI, and to create more agentic workflows and do that stuff for themselves, which is why I think the BPO industry maybe is a little bit lagging when it comes to doing that. What's your thoughts, Jimmy, on how contact centers are looking to their own resources now to do that, which might then drive a little bit of a challenge to the BPO market to say, right, speed up, otherwise you're going to miss out on market share?
Yeah, look, I know some people who are doing it really, really well, and they're, you know, the top quadrant performers. A lot of the guys don't come from like CI backgrounds, like continuous improvement backgrounds, so they've got that cross between like transformation and analytics and test and learn, like methodology, and they've almost been freed by the fact that they don't have to have data scientists and geeks getting in the way and telling them they can't do stuff. And I think that's enabled them, like in-house kind of CI teams. It's like enabled them to get up the change curve. The problem is, though, for me, it's almost like a mathematical problem. And this is why it's a massive threat, because what the tools that they're using are AI tools that come as part of CCaaS or CRM. So, like, in fact, I'll say the Salesforce or NICE and stuff. But the pricing of those and the savings of those are predicated on human cost, labor cost savings. So I can charge you £400 a month for all this fancy agentic platform that's integrated to your CCaaS or your CRM, because you're going to save £2,000 a month on a head, or £1,000 a month on a head. It's a 50% ROI. Well, first of all, there's players in the market now, one of which might be in this call. But there's players in the market now who you don't have to spend £500 a month or £300 a month. You can spend £30 a month and get that saving. That's number one. Number two, but the labour cost. So the labour cost, when you get to UK, US, onshore, it's very easy to build benefits cases. The labour cost when you move to South Africa is a little harder. The labour cost when you move to Philippines is a little harder. The labour cost benefits cases when you move to India, and you maybe in lower costed parts of India, or maybe like Pakistan or Kenya and places like that, they become even more difficult. And you know, I'm somebody who's like used to doing like business cases for like auto QA and auto summarization. But when you look at how slender the opportunity costs are with those types of places, then on traditional SaaS benefits cases, they just don't stack up. And you know, we've been talking about, well, then do you change sample size, or do you as a SaaS provider, do you do it in smaller margin? Now think of that. Now what happens when the AI breaches the lowest global minimum wage? and then what's going to happen? So for me, like it's not really like a deep philosophical argument around the use of AI. For me, it's like there's some people who are doing great stuff. I think there's some people who are bound by the existing procurement processes and this existing tech that they've got and the high cost of that tech, of which those guys, just like the BPOs are protecting the revenue, the SaaS companies are trying to protect the revenue because they don't know what's going to happen. And in and amongst that, I feel like, again, don't want to be controversial, I feel like it's a bit like The Big Short, where everybody knows what's going to happen, everybody can see what's going to happen, but it's not happening. Why is it not happening? Because there's all this pent up barriers for it happening at the moment, which is the long-term contracts and the long-term deals about these two big things. But as soon as that paradigm shifts and those things flip, I think it's going to go from here to here very quickly.
And Justin, I mean, Jimmy's talked about there almost like the labour costs, and actually does AI actually cost more in certain industries when you're looking at outsourcing into different territories? What's your thoughts on that? Do you think we're going to get to a point where it becomes more expensive to use AI than it does to use a human?
I think that's potentially an extreme. I think there may be some leveling out over a period of time, and that's driven by, in my view, pure economics. It's not going to be immediate, but if something is delivering a value, plenty of markets and plenty of examples. If you look at economics in the past, if you can do something a lot cheaper and people buy into it, then slowly that price goes up. Now, do I think it will be the same as? No. Will it differ in different regions? Probably for a while, but I think that will probably even out. A couple of things that came out of what Jimmy said and your introduction as well, and something that we're thinking about is, and I know Jimmy will kind of agree. The pricing models that, if you look at 3, 4, 5 years ago, that the contact center outsourcers, tier ones and the small players were putting together, we were all part of that. Some of that was being driven by procurement, some of that was being driven by the ability to compare like for like. I think we've all had to get a little bit smarter, and maybe answer the questions that procurement want, to show how our pricing is. Is it a fully loaded model? Is it per hour? Is it per call? So on. And then the smarter ones of us are thinking, how do we offer up, see Appendix A, here is an alternative way to price this. And what we're seeing now is, over the term of a contract, the life of a contract, lowering the cost to serve. A few years ago, that was a very scary concept for us in the BPO industry. It's like, why am I going to write a contract where the actual cost of serving a customer is going to go down over the life of the contract? You kind of then counter that with, additional lines of business. You counter that with, an organization is growing, getting more customers and driving more customers through a channel or multiple channels for communication, and then doing better, smarter things. I think what we're finding and what we're leading with is there is still a case, if we're starting at a certain point or half of what we're doing is people focused, then that pricing model still stands. What we're finding where we've where we've implemented some of this stuff for example, a multinational South African telco provider, we're now able to go back to revisit that pricing model and start having the conversation about outcome-based outsourcing. So instead of BPO, it kind of starts to become BFO or business function outsourcing. So we can say, if you outsource a function and then we deliver against that and we deliver an outcome, whether that be first call resolution or an outcome, then we get paid on delivering that outcome. Now, where that gets smart is sometimes that outcome might be delivered by a person, a chatbot, and some AI. But we are then going to charge based on what we've delivered as an outcome, not how many bums on seats do we have and how is technology going to be phased in over 3, 6, 9, 12 months and then lower the price. If we can turn it on its head, and by the way, there's always the other term in this industry, many ways to skin a cat, and there always are. How, are we all pricing the same thing? And that's kind of what's driven us, I think, into some bad habits that we can all get out of, right? But if we can really start looking at, it doesn't matter how many people we have, it doesn't matter where they are, it doesn't matter, a number of things that have always mattered doesn't actually matter anymore. How much does it, where is the value for you as an organization if we were to say that's the function that you're looking for and we charge you for delivering that function? Then it comes down to us as BPO providers. And the comment I was going to say earlier, there's been a huge amount of change. We're a resilient bunch. We're quite versatile. We've stepped forward, we've stepped sideways, we've been dragged along sometimes, and we've led the way. We're a versatile bunch. We go with changes, and it's kind of driven a lot that's happened in our world. But if we can actually find a way where how we actually deliver that outcome kind of comes down to us, and then we put the right mix into delivering that outcome, and we charge per outcome. I'm not saying we can be there tomorrow, but it's certainly something that, in some of the findings that we're getting, we can actually say now we can charge. We can be a business function outsourcer and give you outcome-based outsourcing, not necessarily for everything, but for that particular line of business. And that's starting to get a lot of traction, a lot of interest.
And I think that's the more innovative approach that I would be expecting to come from BPOs, but I'm not seeing that in any great detail. So I'm curious, Jimmy, you were nodding along in agreement with some of the stuff that Justin was saying there. So where do you think the BPO market is lagging when it comes to outcome-based pricing? And do you think that applies to other kind of different sectors around software and use of AI in general?
Yeah, it's like I'm nodding along, but like it's like the problem that I've seen with outcome-based pricing, it's the same shit repackaged, like in a different way, to for want of a better expression, like because it's all been reverse engineered. And I think when you look at it, if you look at like the feedback that people have been giving on the outcome-based pricing, again, I don't want to like drag people through the mud, but these are the big boys, so I can swing at the big boys. But like people go, well, agent force, it's this amount per outcome. We're like, but what is an outcome? Like, and the outcomes are then defined by people who want to keep your revenue high, and it's not in their best interest. And so, I personally think that I think per outcome is a suboptimal model. I would do per human equivalent hour. That's what you want. So you price everything per human equivalent hour, and that's what chimes with like everybody. That's what people understand. Is like, I've got an hourly rate in Durban at 10 quid. I've got an hourly rate in Leeds of 32 quid or 28 quid or whatever it is now, and I can actually do a human equivalent hour. I think Justin's right. We're not going to tell you who's doing the work. It's our choice to optimize. But I'm going to give you a human equivalent hour of 4 quid, or 3 quid, or 2 quid. But it's up to the outsourcer then to then go, I'll give you this, but then how we will decide how we're going to do it. We'll only charge you £2 per human equivalent hour, and you understand that concept because that's how we've been pricing for forever. And you might even have some metrics in there. You might have some at risk and reward. You might have your NPS and all that type of stuff, your service levels and things. But the service level in general, like if an AI is picking up every single call on the front end like an operator, you can get to 100% service level. So you might go, traditional service level. So you might go 80-20 doesn't matter anymore. It's more about your predictive NPS from your blended predictive NPS between different places, your conversion rates, no matter what they are and things. But I think cognitively, I've been thinking about this a lot. Like going to market with a human equivalent hour, but we will put the people we'll put the AI and the people wherever we want in the world. I think that is for me least friction from a buyer's perspective.
What's your perspective on that, Justin? Because I know Jimmy says that we same shit just repackaged in a different way with outcome-based pricing. Is he right? Is human equivalent hour a model you think that the outsourcing industry could get down with? Do you think it's something that would make sense?
Look, I think Jimmy talks a lot of sense. So no one's going to see us sort of squaring up and putting boxing gloves on. One spectrum and the other. And I do agree with the comment that Jimmy said. Some of the bigger players, I agree. We're just repackaging it with some different wording and so on. Now I say we, right? I don't work for one of the bigger players, and one of our goals is to challenge some of those bigger players and to take some of that work from some of those bigger players by showing that we are creative and we aren't just repackaging it and spitting it back in a slightly different way, that we are doing something different. We are driving change. The journey, and I keep going back to this, the resilience that we have in this industry over 20 plus years, you look back at it and we've changed a huge amount. And I think that will continue. I think what you're going to start seeing, and this will be the interesting thing, is where the real change can happen is with organizations who, I'm not going to put a definitive number on it, but where a sweet spot might be 150 to 250 seats, right? In the traditional sense of the word. So FTE, whatever, seats, whatever. When you look at the big players,
just don't use the word human capital because that causes a stir at the moment.
Yeah, if you look at some of the big organisations, they've got particular organisations that might have 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000, right? It's not in their interest, and certainly until end of contract, to make a change, and then it's like what change do we make? And it might be repackaging it in a slightly different way that offers well, we've done that for 5 years now. We're 15% cheaper because right. That's great. I think what you're going to see is some, BPO players, whether we're BPO or BFO, business function outsourcers. We all love our 3-letter acronyms, but we need to be clever. All right. And I'm not saying go to where Jimmy was, but I believe somewhere between where we are and what Jimmy's just said is absolutely right. That will help us. We're brilliant players. Okay. Do we want the 5, 6, 7,000 seat opportunities? To be honest, no, we don't, because we can't drive enough of a differentiator. We don't have the scale. And what we're going to do, it becomes that your mess for less thing. We can do that. And, they charge you that. Well, we can charge you 5% less. And everybody fingers crossed. Right. Where we can make a difference is finding those organizations that, have 100 seats that they're going to outsource. And it might be 100 seats that run in parallel with 100 seats in the UK. Then you have that champion challenge in an internal outsource perspective where we're working in parallel. But, we as a BPO organization, and we've always done this, but now we're talking about doing it with AI. We've implemented this and we're seeing that. Let's now implement that in your organization and get you to the same level, and so on. So ultimately you are getting to that level. Whether it gets to the dollar or the pound figures Jimmy's saying, I think it has to be somewhere in between. And I think the aircraft carriers of this world, that's a difficult thing to slow down and turn around. The agile, nimble, and all the terms that we've always used. The players who see themselves in the tier 2 space or challenging the tier 2 space, that's where you're going to see them.
I think.
And Jimmy, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, can I just come in there? Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, the market is there for these tier 2 or tier 3 emerging into tier 2 players. One of them, or more than one of them, to grasp the nettle and to completely redefine like what a BPO is in this manner. And I think the bigger boys can't adjust. Like, they're publicly traded, they've got shareholders that have to, they've got to protect revenues, they've got inbuilt cultures. This is going to sound very controversial, and it's to the human capital perspective. So I'll rightly get booed off stage. Like, the operations won't change. They've had They've got tenured operations who just simply won't change and won't adapt to the new environment. And that's if you've got if you've got a 100-seat contact center, that's one thing. But if you've got a 100,000-seat contact center where it's very operational led and not transformation led, then it's just very, very difficult for a business to get through that change cycle where like these 500,000 seat, 1,500 seat BPOs, the opportunity is right there. Like they can taste it. They just need to.
And the larger BPOs. So I mean, Justin, you've worked in that space, and Jimmy, you've worked in that space. But the larger BPOs, there's almost like a conflict of interest in embracing AI in a certain perspective, isn't there? And that actually, if we do save or we do recommend using all of these services, the licenses that we've got, the seats that we've got, they're all going to reduce. The margins are then going to become squeezed. The costs of delivering that service is going to get higher. So there is almost it'd be counterproductive to say, right, we'll release tens of seats because my margins then shot. Well, how do the traditional BPOs of the world adapt their business model without cannibalizing their revenue streams?
Turkeys don't vote for Christmas, Garrett. Turkeys don't vote for Christmas.
Yeah, I agree. It's extremely difficult, to be an agile organization who sees it and can change. And you know what? We're not going to get it right every time, but we're going to be as creative as we can, right? And we've got to remember AI, technology players, hardware providers, BPOs, none of us are charities, all right? So, we're in business to make profit and make revenue, right? But maybe, we don't need to tie organizations into, and I think this is you're right, I don't have the answer, but I think this is the issue that the big BPO, the tier ones have. They lock in a long-term contract, and it is not in their best interest to revisit that contract, at a QBR or an annual basis and try and revise it. Their interest is how much can we reduce it when we go for contract renewal. What we're finding, and without wanting to sound cliched, the P word, working in partnership and, having the ability to revisit a contract because it makes sense to revisit a contract, not being frightened to say, you know what, we signed this for 3 years, right? We're a year in. There's a better way to do this. Let's have a look at this. It serves everybody's interest to do so. The big players can't do that. Some of the to answer your question, how are the big players going to do it? There's going to be some very difficult conversations at very high level in some boardrooms around the world where you have to explain, we are going to take a hit in our revenue. We are going to take a hit in our human capital. There are going to be negative media moments, front page news, and it's not going to be pleasant, but we need to come out of the other side of this trying to lead. Now, then I think, to coin Jimmy's phrase, it's the same shit repackaged, and then right. And I don't want to throw shade on it because they are actively looking at changing constantly. They just can't do it as quickly with agility as a smaller player that has the right technology partner. The other thing is, what I have seen, no names, but a big player or a number of big players, they go, and again, back to this thing about the big bang approach to AI. We can tie a customer into a very large consultancy piece, a very large implementation piece covering the end-to-end business. And you know what? You're going to take a long, however great the technology is, you're going to take a long time to actually find the ROI and find the use cases and make it work. Some will, some won't. What we're finding is a piecemeal approach, finding the right use case, delivering immediately, delivering an ROI, moving on to the next piece. And again, the big players, I don't think, have that ability.
Garrett,
what's your thoughts, Jimmy? Go on. When you take yourself off mute, I know you've got an interesting point to make. So fire away.
But it's a profound issue. It's deep rooted, and I don't think they know what to do. So it's like, I know, in fact, not no, but it's obvious some of these outsourcers are spending tens of millions, 20, 30, 40 million a year on AI, trying to develop their own products, trying to develop their own services and things like that. And they're spending that amount of money. They're also spending the money on technology on top of that to try and get place. But then the paradigm then shifts again, like, because you don't need to spend that much money anymore because anybody can do it and everybody can architect it now. So now you've got CTOs of these big companies, and it's not just the BPOs, it's like every company. You've then got these, what I would class as Emperor's New Clothes projects around developing their own AI capability that they've been spending, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of capital over the last 3 years, to then all of a sudden Claude or Gemini or Code or OpenAI release an update and it's gone. You didn't need to spend all of that anyway. And you've got, I think somebody said, I think I spoke to somebody, I think it was a US based outsourcer. They've got like 100 data scientists. I'm like, what are they all doing? Like, it's kind of what they all do. So you've got this like, so and to Justy's point, the contracts are holding them down. They have to be seen to be doing stuff with AI, but they don't know how to do it in the paradigm that they're wanting to protect their own revenue against like the other players coming at it, and their share prices are tanking, and the technology partner share prices are tanking at the same time. And I think the first wave of smaller BPOs who crack the code of it will start to do champion challenges against the bigger rivals, and then all of the contacts will then start to be shifted to the challenger when they see how more cost efficient and productive it is.
You know what? I think where I think the larger BPO markets have excelled and where they've made hay is their ability to, because of the global footprint that they've got, harvest lots of different languages and have that multilingual capability that supports lots of different geographies and lots of different countries. Given the advancements in voice AI, in the multilingual capabilities of voice AI, is there another threat that's coming down the line to say that actually you might not need all of those satellite offices where you outsource, and that's going to get cannibalized by the advancements in AI as well? Before you chime in, Jimmy, because I know you'll have a view on it, Justin, what's your perspective on that? Working in international territories and having done international work, what's your thoughts on how BPOs are going to face into the advancements in AI when it comes to a multilingual capability?
So I've worked for some tier one organizations who then set up hubs wherever they may be, nearshore in Europe to manage European languages and elsewhere near universities of language, and so they can get those resources. And I've presented the slide decks that says, this is our language hub here, and this is our language hub here, and there's a cost saving, but you pay extra for Scandinavian languages and so on. We're now at the point, not for all pieces of work, but for some pieces of work, and I think I used the example, Gary, when you and I had a chat a little while back. If an organization is, let's say, in a not hugely regulated space, all right, and they're buying a chain of stores in Brazil, there's a need for Brazilian Portuguese. Okay, now there's tech out there, and it's good. All right, that I can have a conversation with you, Gary. You speak, you hear it, sub-second delay or better in Portuguese. In Portuguese, you answer in Portuguese, and I hear it in English, or the other way around, whichever way around it is, and then it transcribes it, and you've got that traceable QA model, all the way down the line. That's just one example. I think some of the big players who've invested very, very heavily, and it kind of comes back to the same. There's going to be some tricky boardroom conversations, right? I've sold pieces of work where language is involved, and you know what? There will still be pieces of work where someone actually needs to get through to a person who is fluent in a particular language for a particular reason, and there are multiple ways of that. But if someone's looking for information, that information can be given by anyone via any channel, and now given in a language of choice. That's really easy. So again, those bigger players, they're going to have trouble with. They've got some infrastructure in Eastern Europe. They've got infrastructure in Asia. They've to manage this. And there aren't going to be as many examples of, we need to be in 4 or 5 different locations to, manage all the languages that we need and so on. And some of it was overkill anyway. Some of it was necessary. And I know, Jimmy, you will have a perspective on this because of the whole language piece. But that's some quick wins there. I'm starting up a business in Brazil, and I need to be educated in Portuguese. How do I do that? There's tech out there that can do that straight away. That's an immediate ROI on an immediate use case, for something that really works and delivers, right?
Yeah. And what's your thoughts, Jimmy? Is AI going to cannibalize those multilingual hubs, and is that a threat for the BPO sector? And what do you think they need to do to either retain that or differentiate themselves?
There's no moats. There's no moats anymore. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who does like football sort of journalism, like sort of fan cam stuff on Twitter and things. And he was looking to learn a language. And he says, I really wanted to learn a language. I wanted to learn, I think it was like Japanese or something. And I said to him, well, if you want to do it, that's fine. But there's absolutely no value in like learning a language now, because in the next 1 or 2 years, you're going to have like live translation, and the language barriers between all of us is just going to completely change like how we interact with people and stuff. And so, I'm a programmer by trade. And like I code in 5 or 6 different languages. That none of that is relevant anymore. Like nobody writes code anymore. Like, and I can write the same piece of script in Python, R, C, Ruby, whatever it is. Like, doesn't matter. And so there's no modes. And like the mode of being able to have a multilingual hub somewhere, it's just not a different. To a certain degree, I think Justin's right. For niche types of calls where communication needs to be at the nth degree in certain types of situations, you probably have like some value in having people who are speaking in the native tongue. But as the AI gets more and more advanced over the next 2 or 3 years, I think even that's going to waste away. So I just don't see it. I don't think there's any moats anymore. All the moats are like dying, and I think it's first mover advantage around who builds the best business model and the best brand around this and delivers the best outcomes.
So Justin, I'm going to come to you with this one then, because I think what we're hearing, and I suppose what we're saying here, is there is a competitive advantage with maybe your tier 2s and your tier 3s to partner and truly help organizations transform. But I suppose what is it if everybody has all these similar AI capabilities, what is the competitive advantage of using an outsourcer over doing all of this stuff yourself? Then where would you say people need to think about the benefits of outsourcing over doing all of this stuff in-house, or looking at smaller partners to do it? Where does the BPO market differentiate itself now?
Yeah, I think some of the differentiators remain the same. Are they slightly tougher discussions to have? Yes. AI, AI is going to take your job. There is no industry because AI is going to, right? Is one extreme. And can AI help us do things better, faster, cleaner, more efficiently with less human capital? Sometimes, yes. And sometimes that is the driver, yes. But I think one of the fundamental things that sometimes we kind of all forget is, if I'm a bank, my business is transferring money around the world, managing investments and markets, etc., etc., etc. If I'm retail, high street fashion retail, my business is selling jeans, t-shirts, shoes, etc., etc., etc. All right. Our business isn't retail. Our business is managing your customers, managing the process. However we do that, and I think that still remains the advantage of working with an organization. If you are a retail company, okay, you can go out and hire, in the traditional old world, someone who can set up a contact center and hire contact center staff and set up a contact center and run a contact center because they're intrinsically linked to your brand and so on. You can do that, but your main business is, how am I going to get the best pair of jeans at the best price into the country and onto the shelves in the shortest possible period of time, and make sure my customers come to me rather than the shop next door that sells a similar pair of jeans, etc. That's a retail thing. In healthcare, ultimately, what you want to do is you want to be prescribing, operating, caring, and delivering therapy for customers rather than dealing with, I've just received my bill, I don't really understand it, etc. By partnering, and I think sometimes, and Jimmy, maybe you'll agree, I don't know, but I think sometimes we've forgotten that. When the organisation I work for, Callforce, we got some great experience in financial services and telcos, but we're not a financial services and we're not a telco. We are a business process outsourcer or a business function outsourcer who also brings fantastic native AI technology to the table. We're not a mobile phone provider. However, the problems that are caused for a customer aren't necessarily about the mobile phone or the bill or whatever it might be. Let us deal with those. You go out and build the best phone and the best telephone network, because guess what? We can't do that. We can do the stuff that you can do reasonably well, but we can do it better, faster, quicker. And I think that's the key. Whether it's human capital in a mix of technology and AI, and whether it's function or outcome-based outsourcing, we're not retailers. We're not banks. We deliver a service that the banks and the retailers and the healthcare players have as a secondary part of running their business.
And I think that's been part of the issue, hasn't it? That most contact centres never started off as contact centres. They were a byproduct, building a great product or service and then having overflow demand because you had people contacting you about it. It was an afterthought, and then these afterthoughts have then become like an industry in and of itself.
Yes.
And I think there is definitely something in that. I think it is now the time where taking that expertise that you have, being able to effectively apply the customer service blueprint rapidly across verticals, and then being able to reduce that human capital cost or the labor arbitrage or just the brand customer service paying as quickly as possible. I think that's the value proposition. Sorry.
Go on, Jimmy.
No. You go.
I was going to say, it sounds to me that the differentiation for people considering outsourcing is actually thinking the outsourcer is becoming a transformation consultancy as well as the solutions provider to some of that transformation. Would you agree?
Maybe, but not like the bullshit like transformation one that just charges like loads of money and then isn't on the hook for the delivery. Like it can't be transformation just for the sake of transformation. You've got to be responsible for the identification about where the opportunity is, the change and transformation agenda,
and the outcome, which is essentially what Tim was saying. So if we're delivering, if we're helping you think about the problem differently, we'll use our experience to help you frame the problem differently, but then we'll also go away and we'll deliver the outcome for you in the best possible way.
I kind of raised my eyebrows when you said transformation consultancy, etc. And it's a term, digital transformation or head of transformation and so on. And don't get me wrong, I'm not pointing the finger at the people who have that job title. Some of those people who have that job title, will identify where transformation is possible, will identify opportunities for transformation. Transformation only happens, and I think, as you said, and Jenny said, you've got to identify it, you've got to work out what the solution is to meet it, then you've got to deliver it, then you've got transformation. Okay, so it kind of makes people sort of take a step back when you start talking about transformation. Big bills, big consultancy, takes a long time, etc. At the end, you've actually got to deliver it. And you either, the best transformation consultancy is where you actually identify something right up front. It's almost back to that use case by use case thing. We can deliver transformation, but we start delivering it whilst we're still transforming. You don't have to wait 6 months to get a white paper on here's a bunch of ideas for transformation. Oh, and by the way, now you either got to go to procurement and go and source that and find a partner for that. But you wanted me to tell you about transformation. Those are the areas you can transform your business. That's going to start happening a lot quicker. We don't want to be transformation consultancies. Maybe we want to work with the right ones who have that approach, but also we are able to, we're transformation deliverers in a way. And, you know, whichever side of this argument you come from, you know, we have the ability to identify out but transformation. And I think that's going to be a real big change.
You know what, I think one of the things that I've always said from outsourcers to clients who are looking to move into the outsourcing space or looking to hand off their problems to them is that BPOs are more operationally mature than a lot of contact centers out there, because they've been through the mill. They're constantly looking at the CI agenda, constantly looking at technology. And I think there's a great question from Roshan that kind of articulates that a little bit in the chat, which I think is a good question to frame before we wrap up, and saying, how important is data quality and the operational maturity of contact centers before introducing AI into a contact center environment? I'm going to come to you first on that one, Jimmy, and then Justin, I'm interested in your views around how Coreforce approach this. So what's your response to Roshan's question there?
So operational maturity, 100%, and maybe maturity is the wrong word. Like, so look, I've worked in BPO, but I've been on the phones, but I've not had to manage big BPO teams and things. So perhaps I'll just say this from a bit more of a controversial perspective, or just very bluntly. But like, having operational control, I don't think it's about the maturity of the operations, but they have to know that you're on a change agenda and they're part of that change agenda, and there's a positive feedback loop around it, but they can't stop the agenda and the change from happening. So I think it's more kind of like an operational maturity in terms of like the understanding, a shared understanding about where the business is going, rather than like a maturity in terms of like all of your processes and things being mapped. Because I'll come to that bit on the data quality bit. So just a shared understanding between the senior management and the operations about where the business is heading and what part the operations is going to play, and for the operations to not be a blocker. From a data quality, probably got a slightly different view now. So it used to be, you know, put crap in, get crap out, like you've got to map all your processes and things like that. That is also changing. So with the latest capabilities that, you know, ourselves and like other people have, we can sit something on a desktop which can capture all your different processes. It can capture your poor processes, it can capture your best processes, it can capture all the Excel spreadsheets you go into, it can capture all of your Salesforce tabs that you go into, it can capture when you go to the BBC website to check the cricket score, when you're actually talking to the customer, and all this type of stuff like that. And it can analyze that. It can look at who the best agents are and who finish things quicker and what their journeys are and stuff like that. And I've come to this like thing now, which is forget about all of the friction of having to try and map out the better data points and better data quality, doing data transformation and process transformation. What happens if you can just live with your shit processes, but the AI is doing all of the heavy lifting in the background for your agents and taking all of that work from them, and then you continuously improve the things. So it's identifying where your knowledge base issues are, where your process issues are, where your there's failures in payment gateways and all this type of stuff that you can improve. Not putting the cart before the horse, which is what everybody used to have to do. You used to have to do a load of process mapping. Whereas what happened if you could very quickly map all of your journeys, map those against what's good and what's rubbish, start automating or making more effective the stuff that you've got enough knowledge on, and then continuously going through a continuous improvement cycle over 6, 12, 24 months. That's how I would do it now compared to maybe like 2 or 3 years ago.
And Justin, what's your perspective to Roshan's question there, from somebody who's entrenched in the BPO industry that needs to go through, I suppose, this assessment to help support a centre?
Yeah, look, great question, Roshan. And you know what? You know, whether Jimmy and I have agreed all the way through this call. I think we've hit a happy medium. But I agree with Jimmy completely on this. You know, it used to be, oh, well, the data's crap, or, you know, what do we do with the data now? Data quality is always key, but using the right tools now, we can maximize everything that we do with data. Okay, there's still good data and to coin Jimmy's term, crap data, there is still good data. And how do we find that good data if we do have crap data? Now, we've got the tools to start doing that. And then what do we do at the other end? When that data comes out and is ours, how do we use it next time? How do we use it better? How do we analyze, you know, what the next thing to do with that data? How do we put that data back into our business to be better? But also, how do we hand that data back into, you know, our customer or our partner, whatever you want to call it, and take them on that data journey as well? That's key. The other part of that was operational maturity. You know, across the CCaaS, the CRM, the AI, and the BPOs, we got some great people. And let's never forget that, right? That operational maturity, whether you're operating tech or AI or human capital or a mixture of all, that operational maturity, again, it comes back to your previous question. That's what differentiates us from running an internal contact center or running a bank or a retail organization or healthcare. Interesting thing about it, operational maturity. You know, I stood in a room in Cape Town last week with members of our senior team, and I introduced myself, and you know, not tongue in cheek, but I've been in the industry longer than some of the guys in the room have been alive. And you know what? A lot of those guys in the room are the ones who are coming up with the great ideas and actually sticking their hand up and having an argument in the boardroom, a good argument in the boardroom, and say, why are we doing it that way? Because instead of doing that, we can do this. And the operational maturity bit comes in when you're mature enough to say, hang on, yes, let's listen, let's implement, that's great.
There is a better way.
Maturity in the room is actually at a much younger age than it used to be. Yeah. You know, I'm grey-haired. A lot of these guys, girls, individuals coming through business now are looking at what we're doing in a different way. And that, by the way, is going to drive some change, and that is going to make a difference. You know, whether it gets us down to the dollar or pound figure that Jimmy was talking about, or whether it actually, you know, makes us start doing better things faster, more efficiently. I think that's exciting.
I think that's a brilliant point to end on, Justin, is that the innovation may come from a different generation that the more seasoned veterans of the contact center need to be open to in order to do things differently. And we have reached the top of the hour. We've got 2 minutes over, but I thought it was a really great point to finish on. So final thing to me is to say thank you to Justin and thank you to Jimmy for sparing the time in the preparation and the run up to this, and then sparing the time to come on and chat to everybody. I found that really, really useful. And I think there's been some really interesting points made from both of you, and hopefully people who've been tuning in have made furious notes. But I'll just ask Jimmy and Justin to stay on for 60 seconds more. But for everybody else that's tuned in, next event is on the 25th of June, where we're talking about is good customer experience dying, and I've got Martin Hill Wilson joining me for that one, plus another special guest to be announced next week. So please join us for that before we take a break for the summer. And thank you very much for tuning in, and take care. See you all again next time. Bye bye.
Peace, guys.